The kerosene lamp flickered in Abigail Dawes' workshop, casting dancing shadows across rows of freshly dipped candles hanging from wooden beams. Outside, the December wind rattled the windows of her small cabin on the hill, a lonely sound that had become her constant companion these past months. At 29, Abby had grown accustomed to the whispers that followed her through Elk Hollow's muddy streets. Spinster, peculiar, too set in her ways. She dipped another wick into the pot of melted beeswax, her movements practiced and sure. The candle-making trade had been her salvation after Aunt Martha passed last winter, leaving behind this creaking house and a pile of tax notices that threatened to swallow everything whole. The townspeople bought her candles readily enough they burned cleaner and longer than anything from the general store, but they kept their distance, as if her solitude might be contagious. Poor Abigail, she'd overheard Mrs. Henderson say at the Mercantile last week. 29 and not a suitor in sight, living all alone up on that hill, making candles like some witch in a fairy tale. Abby had wanted to laugh at that. If she were a witch, surely she could magic away the loneliness that crept in during the long winter nights, or conjure up enough money to pay the taxes without selling candles to people who pitied her more than they respected her craft. She set the finished candle aside and moved to the frost-covered window, rubbing a clear spot with her sleeve. The view down the mountain trail never changed much: pine trees heavy with snow, the distant smoke from town chimneys, and occasionally, a rider making his way up or down the narrow path. That's when she saw him again, Colt Merrick. Even from a distance, he cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders beneath a heavy coat, his horse moving with careful steps through the snow. The townsfolk called him the Mountain Man, though he came down often enough for supplies. They spoke of him in hushed tones, the way people talk about thunderstorms or wolves, with a mixture of fear and fascination. Dangerous, they said. A man who chooses to live alone in the wilderness ain't right in the head. Probably running from the law, others speculated. Or maybe he's got Indian blood. You see how he moves through the forest like he was born to it. But Abby had noticed things the gossips missed, the way he always tipped his hat to the elderly, how he'd helped old Sam Carson fix his wagon wheel last month without being asked, the gentle way he handled his horse, speaking to it in low, soothing tones she could almost hear from her window. And lately, she'd noticed something else. He'd started looking back. Their eyes would meet for just a moment as he passed her cabin, and something would flutter in her chest like a caged bird trying to escape. Then he'd touch the brim of his hat in a silent greeting and continue on, leaving her standing at the window feeling foolish and breathless all at once. "You're becoming a silly old maid," she muttered to herself, turning back to her work, but her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the next batch of wax. The truth was, Abby had never expected to reach this age unmarried. When she was younger, there had been suitors: Tom Bradley from the bank, James Mitchell, who ran the feed store, but something in her had always pulled back at the crucial moment. They'd wanted a wife who would smile and nod, who would give up her craft and tend house, who would be grateful for the security of marriage. "You're too particular, Abigail," Aunt Martha had warned her years ago. "A woman needs a husband in this world. You can't make your way alone forever." But Martha had been wrong about that. Hadn't she? Abby had been making her way alone for nearly a year now. The candle business kept food on the table and wood in the stove. She'd learned to chop her own firewood, fix the leaky roof, and ignore the pointed looks when she wore her father's old trousers to work in the garden. Still, on nights like this, with winter pressing against the windows and the wind singing its lonely song, she wondered if she'd been too proud, if maybe security and companionship were worth the price of independence. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. It was late past 8 o'clock. No one from town would venture up the hill after dark, especially with fresh snow falling. Abby wiped her hands on her apron and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" "Miss Dawes." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, yet somehow known. "It's Colt Merrick. I've got Mrs. Patterson with me. Her wagon broke an axle down the trail. She needs somewhere warm to wait while I fix it. Abby's heart hammered as she unlatched the door. There he stood, larger than life, snow dusting his dark hair and beard. Beside him, Emma Patterson shivered violently, her lips blue with cold. "Oh, Emma." Abby ushered them inside quickly. "Come sit by the fire. I'll make tea." As she busied herself with the kettle, she was acutely aware of Colt's presence in her small kitchen. He seemed to fill the space, making her humble home feel even smaller. His eyes gray as winter storm clouds took in everything: the neat rows of candles, the worn but clean furniture, the books stacked on the shelf by the window. "You make all these yourself?" he asked, gesturing to the candles. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It was my aunt's trade. She taught me." He nodded slowly. "They're fine work. Bought some myself last month. Burned twice as long as store-bought." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She turned to hide her flushed cheeks, focusing on pouring tea for Emma, who huddled by the fire wrapped in one of Abby's quilts. "I'll see to that axle now," Colt said, heading for the door. "Shouldn't take more than an hour if I can get the wheel off." "In this snow," Emma protested weakly. "Colt Merrick, you'll freeze to death." He smiled, then just a slight upturn of his lips, but it transformed his face entirely. "I've worked in worse. Ma'am, Miss Dawes, might I borrow a lantern?" Of course. Abby fetched her best lantern, making sure it was full of oil. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent a jolt through her like lightning striking a tree. "Thank you," he said quietly, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he was gone, back into the swirling snow. Emma Patterson was not known for her discretion, and as soon as the door closed, she fixed Abby with a knowing look. "That man's sweet on you." "Don't be ridiculous," Abby said, busying herself with stoking the fire. "I've got eyes, haven't I? The way he looked at you just then?" Emma shook her head. "And him insisting on bringing me here instead of to the Johnsons' place, which is closer, said you'd take good care of me." Abby's hand stilled on the poker. "He said that?" "Mm-hmm. Though Lord knows why you'd want attention from a man like that. Living alone up in the mountains, barely talking to anyone. Probably got all sorts of dark secrets. Or maybe he just values his peace," Abby said more sharply than she intended. Emma's eyebrows rose. "Defending him already? My. They sat in awkward silence after that, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind howling outside. Abby tried to focus on her mending, but her thoughts kept straying to the man working in the snow. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the window, catching glimpses of the lantern light moving around Emma's wagon. True to his word, Colt returned within the hour, snow-covered but triumphant. "Should hold until you can get to the blacksmith tomorrow." He told Emma, "I'll drive you home now." As they prepared to leave, Emma squeezed Abby's hand. "Thank you for the tea and the warmth, dear, and think about what I said. A woman your age can't afford to be too choosy." The words stung, but before Abby could respond, Colt spoke up. "Seems to me Miss Dawes is doing just fine on her own. Not everyone needs to live by other folks' schedules." Emma huffed, but said nothing more. As Colt helped her to the wagon, he glanced back at Abby standing in the doorway. "Thank you for your hospitality. Miss Dawes, good evening." "Good evening, Mr. Merrick, and thank you for helping Emma." He touched his hat brim again, that familiar gesture that always made her pulse quicken. "Just being neighborly." As the wagon disappeared into the snowy darkness, Abby closed the door and leaned against it. Her small cabin felt different somehow, as if Colt's presence had left an imprint in the air. She could still smell the pine and leather scent of him, could still feel the brief touch of his fingers on hers. "You're a fool, Abigail Dawes," she told herself firmly. "A man like that isn't looking for a spinster candle maker. And you're not looking for anyone at all. But as she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd defended her to Emma Patterson, or the way his eyes had lingered on her face just before he left, or the fact that he'd noticed her candles burned longer than store-bought ones. Small things, perhaps, but in a life as quiet and solitary as hers, small things had a way of feeling momentous. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. And somewhere up the mountain, a man who chose solitude was perhaps thinking of a woman who understood the value of it. But that was just foolish speculation, Abby told herself as she blew out her candle and settled into bed. Tomorrow would bring more work, more whispers from the townspeople, more long hours alone with her wax and wicks. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of gray eyes and snow-dusted hair, and a voice saying she was doing just fine on her own. The storm arrived 3 days later with the fury of a spurned lover. Abby had seen it building on the horizon, dark clouds piling up like mountains against mountains, the air growing heavy and still. She'd spent the morning in town, purchasing what supplies she could afford: flour, salt, coffee, and precious blocks of beeswax for her candle making. The general store buzzed with nervous activity as townsfolk prepared for what old-timers predicted would be the worst blizzard in a decade. Abby navigated the crowded aisles, her basket growing heavier with each necessity. "Better stock up good? Miss Dawes," Mr. Clarence, the shopkeeper, advised as he tallied her purchases. "This one's going to be a doorbuster. You got enough firewood up at your place?" "I'll manage," she said, counting out her coins carefully. The tax bill sat heavy in her mind. Every penny spent on supplies was one less toward keeping her home. That's when she saw him. Colt Merrick stood at the counter, helping old Mrs. Sullivan count out her money with patient fingers. The elderly woman's hands shook with palsy, and coins scattered across the worn wood. Without a word, Colt gathered them up and placed the exact amount in Mr. Clarence's palm, adding a few coins of his own when Mrs. Sullivan wasn't looking. "Bless you, young man." Mrs. Sullivan patted his arm. "Such a help to an old woman." "No trouble, ma'am," Colt replied, his deep voice gentle. "You need help getting your supplies home." Abby turned away, pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. The simple kindness of the gesture stirred something in her chest. This was the dangerous man the town whispered about, the same one who paid for an old woman's groceries without seeking recognition. She hefted her basket and headed for the door, struggling with its weight. The brass handle slipped from her grasp as she tried to maneuver through, and suddenly the basket wasn't heavy anymore. Colt had taken it from her hands. "Allow me," he said, opening the door with his free hand. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending loose snow skittering across the wooden walkways. Abby pulled her shawl tighter. "Thank you, Mr. Merrick, but I can manage." A package tumbled from her basket, the precious beeswax blocks she needed for her work. They hit the frozen ground with a dull thud. Both bent to retrieve them at the same moment, nearly colliding. Colt's hand closed over the package first, but instead of simply handing it back, he paused. "Quality wax," he observed, "from Benjamin's apiary over in Cedar Ridge." Abby blinked in surprise. "Yes, how did you—" "Best wax in the territory. Man knows his bees." He placed the package carefully back in her basket, then lifted the whole thing as if it weighed nothing. "Where's your wagon?" "I walked." At his raised eyebrow, she lifted her chin. "It's not far. 3 miles uphill with a storm coming in." It wasn't a question. He studied the darkening sky, then her thin shawl and worn boots. "That's too far." Before she could protest, he was striding toward his own wagon, her basket secured in the back. "I'm headed up the mountain anyway," he said, which they both knew was a lie. His cabin lay in the opposite direction. Pride warred with practicality. The wind was growing fiercer by the minute, and she could already feel snow beginning to fall. Thank you." He helped her up to the wagon seat, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, she was close enough to see the flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes, to notice the small scar above his left eyebrow. Then the moment passed, and he was climbing up beside her, taking the reins. They rode in silence at first, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the rising wind. Abby stole glances at his profile, the strong jaw, the weathered skin that spoke of years under sun and snow. His hands on the reins were scarred but gentle, guiding the horses with minimal effort. "Mrs. Patterson's wagon holding up?" she asked finally, needing to fill the silence. "Far as I know. Haven't heard otherwise." He paused, then added, "She speaks highly of you. Says you make the finest candles in the territory." "Emma Patterson says a lot of things," Abby replied, remembering the woman's comments about her age and unmarried state. A slight smile tugged at his lips. "That she does, but she's right about the candles." They were climbing now, the road growing steeper. Snow fell harder, thick flakes that stuck to everything they touched. Colt guided the horses with sure hands, but Abby could feel the animals' nervousness in the way the wagon swayed. "Storm's coming in faster than expected," he muttered, eyeing the sky. By the time they reached her cabin, the snow was falling in earnest, a thick curtain of white that obscured the valley below. Colt helped her down and carried her supplies to the door. But when she turned to thank him, she saw the concern in his eyes as he studied the rapidly worsening conditions. "I should go," he said, but uncertainty colored his tone. "Your cabin's another 5 miles up," Abby pointed out. "In this?" She gestured at the swirling snow. "I've ridden through worse." But even as he said it, his horses snorted and stamped, clearly agitated. One, a bay mare, kept tossing her head and backing away from the wind. "Your horses don't think so," Abby observed. She made a decision that surprised her with its boldness. "You could wait it out here, just until the worst passes." He stood very still, snow gathering on his shoulders and hat. "That wouldn't be proper, Miss Dawes. People would talk." "People already talk," she said quietly. "Besides, I won't have your frozen death on my conscience because I was too concerned with propriety to offer shelter in a blizzard." For a long moment, they stood there in the swirling snow, something unspoken hanging between them. Then Colt nodded slowly. "Just until it passes, I'll see to the horses." Abby hurried inside to stoke the fire and heat water for coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and not from cold. What was she doing? Inviting a man this man into her home. But the thought of him trying to reach his cabin in this storm, possibly freezing on the mountain because she'd been too proper to offer shelter. When he entered, stamping snow from his boots, the cabin seemed to shrink. He removed his hat and coat, hanging them carefully by the door, and she was struck again by how he filled the space not just physically, but with his quiet presence. "Horses are settled in your lean-to," he said. "Fed them some of your hay. I'll replace it when the storm clears." "No need." She handed him a cup of coffee, proud that her hands were steady. "Consider it payment for the ride home." He wrapped his large hands around the cup, and she noticed how he savored the warmth before drinking. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Abby gestured to the chair by the fire. "Please sit. You must be half frozen." "What about you?" "I need to tend the stew." She busied herself at the stove, acutely aware of every movement, every breath in the small space. "It's nothing fancy. Rabbit and vegetables. Smells good." He settled into the chair, her chair, the one she sat in every evening, and the sight of him there did something strange to her insides. They ate in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. The windows rattled in their frames, and snow piled against the glass. But inside, the fire crackled warm and bright. Abby found herself stealing glances at her unexpected guest, noting the way he ate with quiet appreciation, the careful way he used his napkin. "You said you're headed north tomorrow," she ventured finally. "Hunting." Lumber contract. Army fort needs timber before the deep winter sets in. He paused, considering. Dangerous work this time of year. That's why the pay's good. Is that why you do it, the money? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed under that steady gray gaze. I do it because I'm good at it, because the mountain doesn't care who you are or where you came from. It's honest. Unlike people, the question slipped out before she could stop it. Some people. He studied his coffee cup. You're honest, though that's rare. Heat flooded her cheeks. You hardly know me. Mr. Merrick. Colt, he corrected quietly. And I know enough. Know you work hard. Make quality goods. Know you helped Emma Patterson without making her feel beholden. Know you're not afraid of what people say. I'm afraid of plenty, she admitted. But you don't let it stop you. He set down his cup and leaned forward slightly. That's what courage is. The wind howled louder, and somewhere outside, a tree branch cracked under the weight of snow. They both looked toward the window, now completely white with accumulated snow. I should, Colt began, rising. You should stay, Abby interrupted. It's gotten worse. You'd be foolish to try reaching your cabin now. He remained standing, tension in every line of his body. Miss Dawes, Abby, if I stay, your reputation will be no worse than it already is. She met his eyes squarely. I'm 29 years old. Mr. Merrick Colt. I make candles for a living and wear men's trousers to chop wood. My reputation is already beyond repair by town standards. Their standards are wrong. The fierce certainty in his voice made her breath catch. They stood facing each other across the small room, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Something shifted in the air between them, electric as the storm outside. Colt moved first, turning away to add wood to the fire. I'll sleep here by the hearth. Come first light. I'll clear a path and be gone before anyone's stirring in town. I'll get blankets, Abby said, her voice not quite steady. She retreated to her small bedroom, pressing her hands to her burning cheeks. What was happening to her? This wasn't like her at all, inviting a man to stay, feeling this pull towards someone she barely knew. But that was the thing, wasn't it somehow? She felt she did know him. Knew him in the way he'd helped Mrs. Sullivan, in his gentle handling of his horses, in the quiet appreciation of her simple meal. Knew him in the way he looked at her not with pity or condescension, but as if he saw who she really was and found her worthy. When she returned with an armload of blankets and a pillow, she found he'd already made himself useful, banking the fire for the night and checking that the windows were secure against the storm. Such simple domestic tasks. But seeing him perform them in her space made her heart constrict strangely. Thank you, he said, taking the bedding from her. Their fingers brushed, and this time neither pulled away immediately. If you need anything, she began. I won't, but he softened it with a slight smile. Get some rest, Abby. Storm should blow itself out by morning. She retreated to her bedroom but found sleep elusive. Every sound made her aware of his presence, the creak of floorboards as he settled by the fire, the quiet rhythm of his breathing that somehow carried over the storm's fury. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Just before dawn, she heard him moving quietly about. By the time she dressed and emerged, he had coffee brewing and had already been outside to check on the horses. Snow still fell, but lighter now, the worst of the storm's fury spent. I'll clear your path before I go, he said without preamble. And bring firewood up from your pile. You don't have to. I do. He pulled on his coat, then paused at the door. If I don't make it down from the north. You'll make it down, she interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded once and stepped out into the white morning. Abby watched from the window as he cleared her path with strong, efficient movements. When he finally let his horses out and climbed aboard his wagon, he looked back at the cabin. She raised her hand in farewell, and he touched his hat brim in that familiar gesture. As his wagon disappeared into the swirling snow, Abby pressed her palm against the cold glass. The cabin felt too quiet, too empty, as if he'd taken something vital with him. "One night won't hurt," she whispered to herself, echoing words he hadn't said yet. But somehow, she knew that one night had already changed everything. The second storm came a week later, fiercer than the first. Abby had spent the intervening days trying to forget the feeling of Colt's presence in her cabin, the way he'd made her small space feel complete rather than crowded. She'd thrown herself into her work, producing more candles than she could sell, as if keeping her hands busy could quiet her restless thoughts. But when the wind began to howl again and snow started falling in thick sheets, her first thought was of him. Was he back from the north? Had he made it to his cabin safely? By evening, the storm had become a monster. The windows shook in their frames, and snow piled so high against the door she could barely push it open to check on her meager livestock. She'd just finished securing the chickens when she heard it a pounding at her door, urgent and demanding. Her heart leaped. "Colt!" But when she struggled to open the door against the wind, it wasn't Colt standing there. It was Samuel Morrison, the banker's son, swaying on his feet and reeking of whiskey. "Miss Dawes," he slurred, pushing past her into the cabin. "Terrible storm. Needed shelter." Abby's stomach clenched with unease. Samuel had been one of her suitors years ago, before she'd refused his proposal. He'd taken it badly, spreading rumors about her unnatural independence and mannish ways. "The town's closer than my cabin. Samuel, you should go back." "Can't. Too much snow." He collapsed into the chair by the fire Colt's chair. Her mind supplied unhelpfully. "Besides, you owe me hospitality. Least you can do after humiliating me." "That was 5 years ago," Abby said carefully, staying near the door. "Still burns," he muttered, taking a flask from his coat. Whole town laughing. Samuel Morrison, rejected by the candlemaker. The next hour passed in tense misery. Samuel drank steadily from his flask, his comments growing more bitter and inappropriate. Abby kept her distance, her skin crawling every time he looked at her with bleary, resentful eyes. "You and that mountain man," he said suddenly. "Heard about it. He stayed here last week." "The storm." "Sure, the storm." Samuel laughed unpleasantly. "Always thought you were too good for honest men. Guess we know better now." Abby's temper flared. "I think you should leave." "In this," he gestured at the window, "you'd send a man out to freeze then again. You always were cold-hearted." That's when they heard another knock at the door, firm and steady despite the wind. Abby's heart recognized the rhythm before her mind did. She yanked open the door. Colt stood there, snow-covered but solid, real here. "Saw smoke from your chimney. Wanted to make sure." His words died as he took in the scene Samuel drunk by the fire. Abby pressed against the wall, the tension thick as smoke. "Well, well," Samuel sneered. "The mountain man returns." Colt stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the room's dynamics. "Morrison." His voice was neutral, but Abby saw the way his hands flexed, the careful way he positioned himself between her and Samuel. "Come to check on your woman." Samuel stood unsteadily. "Or just hoping for another storm to trap you here?" "I came to check on a neighbor," Colt said evenly, like any decent man would. "Decent," Samuel spat. "Rich, coming from a hermit who lives like a savage." Colt didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned to Abby. "You all right?" The gentle concern in his voice nearly undid her. "Yes, Samuel was just leaving." "Like hell I am." Samuel swayed forward. "I was here first. You can't just—" "I can and I will." Colt's voice remained calm, but steel undergirded every word. "You've been drinking. Morrison, you're not thinking straight. I'll take you back to town." "I don't need your help." "Wasn't offering—" was telling. Colt picked up Samuel's coat and held it out. "We're going. Now." For a moment, violence hung in the air like lightning about to strike. Then Samuel deflated, snatching his coat. "This isn't over," he muttered, stumbling toward the door. "People will hear about this. Both of you, alone up here." "Good," Colt said quietly. "Let them talk. Maybe they'll also hear about how you forced your way into a lady's home, drunk and uninvited." Samuel's face went pale, then red. Without another word, he lurched out into the storm. Colt turned to Abby. "Pack what you need for the night." "What?" "Can't leave you here alone, not with him drunk and angry." He was already moving, checking the windows, banking the fire. "He might come back." "I can't just leave." "You can." He faced her fully then, and she saw worry in his gray eyes. "Please, Abby, I know what men like Morrison are capable of when their pride's wounded. Let me take you somewhere safe." "Where?" But even as she asked, she knew. "My cabin, just for tonight." He must have seen her hesitation because he added, "I'll sleep in the barn. You'll have the house to yourself, but you'll be safe." The word safe decided her. She'd felt many things in Samuel's presence: anger, disgust, a touch of fear. But safe never. She packed quickly, gathering necessities and a change of clothes. Colt readied his horses, which he'd apparently left in her lean-to when he arrived. The storm fought them every step of the way up the mountain, but Colt handled the wagon with the same steady competence he brought to everything. His cabin, when they finally reached it, surprised her. She'd expected something rough, barely civilized. Instead, she found a snug, well-built home with good furniture and shelves lined with books. Everything was clean, orderly, cared for. "It's not much," he said, lighting lamps and stirring the banked fire back to life. "It's perfect," she breathed, meaning it. The cabin felt like him, solid, unpretentious, quietly refined. He showed her where things were, made sure she had enough firewood, then headed for the door. "Barn's just across the yard. You need anything, you call out." "Colt," he paused at her voice. "Thank you for coming when you did." "For this?" "Always," he said simply. And then he was gone. Abby explored the cabin slowly, running her fingers over the smooth wood furniture, examining the titles on his shelves, poetry mixed with practical guides, histories alongside adventure tales. In the kitchen, she found everything neatly organized, even a jar of preserves labeled in a woman's hand that made her wonder about his past. She settled into a chair by the fire, his chair, carrying the subtle scent of pine and leather that she'd come to associate with him. The storm raged outside, but in here, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: protected, not caged or diminished, but sheltered by someone who expected nothing in return. Sleep was elusive. Every sound made her think of Colt in the cold barn, probably freezing while she enjoyed his warm home. The unfairness of it gnawed at her until finally, near midnight, she couldn't stand it anymore. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she opened the door. The wind nearly knocked her back, but she pressed forward, following the rope line he'd strung between house and barn. She found him in the hayloft, wrapped in a horse blanket, wide awake. "Abby," he sat up quickly. "What's wrong?" "This is wrong," she said, teeth chattering. "Me in your warm house while you freeze out here? It's proper." "Hang proper?" The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. "You saved me tonight. Colt, the least I can do is share your own hearth with you." He stood slowly, towering over her in the dim light. "People will talk worse than before." "Let them." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm tired of living my life by what narrow-minded people might say." For a long moment, they stood there in the cold barn, something momentous balancing between them. Then Colt nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm sleeping by the fire." Back in the cabin, Abby made tea while Colt arranged blankets by the hearth, the domesticity of it sharing space. Moving around each other with careful courtesy made her chest tight with an emotion she didn't want to name. "Tell me about the books," she said, needing to fill the silence. "You have quite a collection." A slight smile touched his lips. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Ohio before—" He trailed off, but Abby didn't press. She believed in the power of words, said a man could travel the whole world through books. "Is that why you came west to travel?" "Partly." He stared into the fire. "Also to find somewhere I fit. Never quite managed it in civilization." "I understand that feeling," Abby said softly. He looked at her then, firelight dancing in his eyes. "I know you do. It's one of the things—" "What?" "One of the things I admire about you." The words came out rough, as if pulled from deep within. "Your strength, your independence, the way you don't apologize for who you are." Abby's heart hammered against her ribs. "Colt!" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't—" "Don't apologize." She found herself moving closer, drawn by something stronger than propriety. "Please don't apologize for being the first person to see me as more than an oddity or a problem to be solved." They sat in silence then, but it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of recognition, of two solitary souls finding their echo in another. The fire crackled, the storm howled, and somewhere in the space between them, something shifted irrevocably. "In the morning," Colt said finally, "I'll take you home. Make sure Morrison hasn't come back. And then you'll leave for the north again." "Contract's not finished." He paused. "But I'll only be gone a week this time. Maybe when I get back." "Yes." He turned to look at her fully. "Maybe when I get back, I could call on you proper, if you'd welcome it." Abby's breath caught. "I thought you didn't care about proper—" "I don't, but you deserve to be courted with respect." His voice dropped lower. "You deserve everything. Abby, everything I'm probably not good enough to give." "Let me decide what you're good enough for," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Something flared in his eyes, hope, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "All right then." As the night wore on and the storm began to exhaust itself, they talked about books and dreams, about the loneliness of choosing solitude over settling, about 100 small things that suddenly seemed important to share. When dawn finally broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Abby realized she hadn't felt this understood, this seen, since Aunt Martha died. Maybe not even then. "One night," Colt murmured as he prepared to take her home. "Funny how one night can change things." "2 nights now," Abby corrected, and was rewarded with one of his rare, full smiles. As they descended the mountain together, Abby knew the gossips would have a field day. The spinster candlemaker spending the night at the hermit's cabin, what a scandal it would be. But with Colt's steady presence beside her and the memory of their conversation warming her better than any fire, Abby found she truly didn't care. Let them talk. She had found something infinitely more valuable than their approval, someone who saw her truly and didn't want her to change. The storm had passed, but what it had brought together would endure far longer than wind and snow. The days following the storm passed in a haze of whispered speculation and pointed looks. Abby felt the weight of every stare as she went about her business in town, but she held her head high, meeting each gaze with steady defiance. What surprised her wasn't the gossip she'd expected, but the small acts of kindness that emerged alongside it. Mrs. Sullivan left a jar of apple butter on her doorstep with a note for the woman brave enough to follow her heart. The blacksmith's wife ordered extra candles, pressing Abby's hand warmly when she delivered them. Even gruff old Benjamin from the apiary stopped by with fresh honeycomb, muttering something about good people deserving good things. But for every ally, there were 3 detractors. Samuel Morrison had done his work well, spreading his version of events with vindictive enthusiasm. According to him, Abby was carrying on with the mountain man, entertaining him at all hours, abandoned to wanton behavior. A week crawled by with no word from Colt. Abby threw herself into her work, trying not to count the days, trying not to watch the mountain trail from her window. He'd said a week. She could wait a week. On the 7th night, another storm rolled in, not as fierce as the last, but steady and insistent. Abby was trimming wicks when she heard the knock. Her hands stilled, heart recognizing that particular rhythm. She opened the door to find Colt covered in snow, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes warm as they found hers. "You're back," she breathed. "Said I would be." He stayed on the threshold, melting snow forming puddles around his boots. "May I come in?" "Of course." She stepped aside, trying not to show how her hands trembled. "You look tired." "And cold. Long week. Trouble at the lumber camp." He removed his coat, and she saw the careful way he moved, favoring his left side. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Just a disagreement with a tree that didn't want to fall where we aimed it." But when she insisted on checking, she found ugly bruising along his ribs. He sat still as she applied a poultice, his jaw tight with suppressed pain. "You should have seen a doctor," she scolded gently. "I did. You." His attempt at lightness fell flat when he winced at her touch. They settled by the fire, tea warming their hands. For a while, neither spoke, content just to share space again. Then Colt shifted, reaching into his pack. "Brought you something." He pulled out a small wrapped package. "From Cedar Ridge. Thought you might could use it." Inside was the finest beeswax she'd ever seen, pure white and sweetly scented. But beneath it lay something else, a slim volume of poetry, its leather binding worn but well cared for. "Wordsworth," she read, touching the gold lettering reverently. "Colt, I can't—" "Was my mother's," he said quietly. "Think she'd like knowing it went to someone who'd appreciate it." The gift was too much, too personal. Abby's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's more." He seemed suddenly nervous. This man who faced down trees and storms without flinching. "I've been thinking, up at the camp, about us, about what Morrison said." Abby's stomach clenched. "What about it?" "He was wrong about your character, but he wasn't wrong that I've been calling on you improperly." Colt met her eyes steadily. "You deserve better than sneaking around, better than my showing up only when storms drive me here. I don't care what people think." "I know, but I care what you deserve." He took a breath. "I'd like to court you proper. Abby, come calling in daylight. Take you to church socials. Let every gossip in town see I'm proud to be with you." Abby set down her tea carefully, afraid she might spill it with her shaking hands. "And if I don't want church socials and public displays?" Something flickered in his eyes' disappointment, but then she continued. "What if I just want this?" She gestured between them. "Conversation by the fire, shared silences, someone who sees me as I am." "Then that's what we'll have." His voice roughened. "Whatever you want, Abby. However you want it." The wind rattled the windows, snow hissing against the glass. Inside, the fire popped and settled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Abby found herself moving closer to him on the worn sofa, drawn by warmth and something deeper. "Tell me about the lumber camp," she said. "About your week." So he did, his deep voice painting pictures of towering pines and dangerous work, of men who respected him for his skill rather than his solitude. She told him about her week too, the orders placed, the kindnesses and cruelties, the way she'd found herself storing up moments to share with him. As the evening wore on, the space between them gradually disappeared. Abby wasn't sure who moved first, only that suddenly Colt's arm was along the back of the sofa, almost but not quite touching her shoulders. She could feel the heat of him, smell the pine and snow, and something uniquely him. "I should go," he said eventually, though he made no move to rise. "The storm's getting worse," Abby observed. It was true the wind had picked up to a howl, snow falling thick and fast. "Abby!" There was warning in his voice, but also longing. "Stay." The word emerged soft but certain. "Just stay." He turned to look at her fully then, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "If I stay tonight, I might not have the strength to leave come morning." "Then don't." She reached up, touching his face gently, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. "I'm tired of being careful. Colt, tired of pretending I don't count the days until I see you again." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "You counted every one." Something shifted in his expression, walls crumbling like spring ice. "Abby, He stopped, struggling with words. "I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel." "Then don't say it." She was close enough now to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, to feel his breath on her skin. "Show me." For a moment, time suspended like snow in the air. Then Colt's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch infinitely gentle for such a strong man. "One kiss," he murmured, echoing words from a story not yet fully told. "One kiss won't hurt." "No," Abby agreed softly. "It won't." Their lips met, soft and searching at first, then deeper as the walls they'd both built finally gave way. Abby had been kissed before chaste pecks from would-be suitors, but this was different. This was coming home. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since I first saw you at your window, watching me ride past. You knew." A slight smile tugged at his lips. "Hard to miss. Made my whole week, seeing you there." They kissed again, longer this time, hands tentative but growing bolder. The storm outside seemed to approve, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of white silence. Eventually, propriety reasserted itself. Colt pulled back, though his hand still tangled in her hair. "I should sleep by the fire," Abby finished. "I know." But she didn't move away immediately, savoring the warmth of him, the solid presence she'd missed all week. They prepared for bed with the careful courtesy of two people hyper-aware of boundaries newly crossed. But when Abby emerged from her room with blankets for him, she found Colt had already made himself a pallet by the hearth. "Good night, Abby," he said softly. "Good night, Colt." She hesitated at her bedroom door. "Thank you for the wax, the book, for coming back." "Always will," he promised. "Long as you'll have me." Sleep came easier than expected, the sound of him breathing in the next room as soothing as a lullaby. Abby drifted off feeling safer, warmer, more complete than she had in years. She woke near dawn to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly about her kitchen. Through her cracked door, she could see Colt building up the fire, his movements careful and domestic. "You don't have to do that," she said, emerging wrapped in a shawl. He turned, and the smile that lit his face at seeing her made her heart skip. "Wanna, like taking care of you." They shared breakfast as the storm finally began to weaken, conversation flowing easy as spring water. It felt natural, right, like they'd been doing this for years instead of mere weeks. "I have to go to town today," Colt said eventually. "Supplies for the next run north." "When do you leave?" 3 days. He studied her face. "But only for 4 days this time. Last trip of the season. And then I stay." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "If you'll have me around." "I think I could tolerate your presence," she said, aiming for lightness but failing when her voice caught. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "When I get back, I want to do this right. Court you properly, whatever that means to you. Maybe even..." "What?" "Maybe even make it permanent, if you're willing." Abby's heart hammered so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," he said carefully. Want to do that right too, but I'm saying my intentions aren't casual. Abby Dawes? Haven't been since the night you offered me shelter in that first storm. She turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. Mine aren't casual either. When he left an hour later, the kiss goodbye lingered long enough to make them both breathless. Abby watched from her window as his wagon disappeared down the trail. But this time the watching felt different. This time, she wasn't yearning for something distant and impossible. This time, she was waiting for something promised, something real. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new, and in its wake, two solitary souls had found something worth changing for, worth fighting for, worth keeping. As Abby turned back to her candles, Wordsworth's poetry on the table and Colt's presence still warming her home, she smiled. Let the gossips talk. She had found something far more valuable than their approval, a love as steady and true as the mountain itself. The morning after Colt left, Abby woke to a world transformed by gossip. She'd barely finished her morning tea when Emma Patterson arrived, ostensibly to order candles but clearly bursting with curiosity. "My dear Abigail," Emma began, settling herself in Abby's kitchen without invitation. "The whole town is talking about that mountain man's wagon leaving your property at dawn. Again." Abby continued measuring wax, keeping her voice steady. "I imagine they are." "And you have nothing to say about it?" Emma's eyes glittered with the anticipation of fresh scandal. "What would you like me to say? That Colt Merrick helped me during the storm? That he's a good man who doesn't deserve the suspicion this town heaps on him?" Abby met Emma's gaze directly. "Or would you prefer I confirm whatever salacious story Samuel Morrison is spreading?" Emma had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Samuel's been drinking more since that night, says terrible things when he's in his cups." "Then perhaps people should consider the source before believing every word." "Perhaps." Emma studied her shrewdly. "You've changed, Abigail. There's something different about you." "Yes," Abby agreed simply. "I've stopped caring what narrow-minded people think." After Emma left with her candle order and no fresh gossip to spread, Abby tried to focus on her work, but concentration proved elusive. Every small sound made her think of Colt. Every drift of snow outside her window reminded her of storms shared and promises made. By the second day, the solitude that had once been her comfort now felt oppressive. She found herself talking to the chickens, rereading the Wordsworth poems until she'd memorized half of them, counting hours like a lovesick girl. Which she supposed she was, though at 29, girl hardly fit anymore. On the morning of the third day, Reverend Thomas arrived. Abby's heart sank as she watched his black-clad figure trudge up her snow-covered path. The minister's visits never boded well. "Miss Dawes," he intoned gravely at her door. "May I come in? We need to speak about your situation." She let him in but didn't offer tea. Some visits didn't deserve the courtesy. "I'll be direct," Reverend Thomas began, settling his thin frame in her chair, Colt's chair. "Your association with Mr. Merrick has become a matter of public concern. The moral fabric of our community." "Is no business of mine," Abby interrupted. "Nor is my private life any business of yours." His face pinched with disapproval. "You are a member of this community. Miss Dawes, your actions reflect upon all of us. This man, living wild in the mountains, visiting you at all hours, has shown me more genuine Christian kindness than most of the gossiping hypocrites who fill your pews each Sunday." The words emerged sharper than intended, but Abby didn't retract them. "Miss Dawes, I must insist." "No, Reverend, you must not." She stood, forcing him to look up at her. "I've harmed no one. I've broken no laws. If my neighbors choose to make entertainment of my life rather than tend to their own souls, that's their failing, not mine." He stood as well, gathering his righteousness like armor. "I had hoped to appeal to your better nature, but I see you're determined in your waywardness. Don't be surprised when the decent folk of this town turn their backs on you entirely." if their decency is conditional on my conforming to their narrow expectations," Abby said, opening the door pointedly, "then it's not worth having." After he left, she sank into her chair, shaking with anger and something like grief. Was this what choosing love meant, complete isolation from the community she'd known all her life? But then she remembered Colt's eyes when he'd promised to return, the warmth of his rare smiles, the safety she'd felt in his presence, and she had known from that first storm that he was worth any price society demanded. The rest of the day passed in a blur of defiant productivity. If the town wanted to shun her, she'd give them the best candles they'd ever burned while doing it. She worked until her hands ached and her back protested, trying to exhaust herself into not thinking about tomorrow. Colt was due back tomorrow. That night, she barely slept. Every sound could be horse hooves on the trail. Every gust of wind might carry his voice. When dawn finally broke, she gave up pretending and sat by the window with her tea, watching the trail with naked anticipation. He appeared just after noon, his wagon loaded with supplies, but his eyes seeking her window first thing. Abby was out the door before propriety could stop her. Not running, she maintained that much dignity, but walking as fast as snow and skirts allowed. "You're back," she called, hating how breathless she sounded. "Said I would be." He swung down from the wagon, and she saw the moment he registered something was wrong. "What's happened?" How like him to read her so easily. Nothing that matters now. But he wasn't fooled. His jaw tightened as he took in her tired eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Who visited? Reverend Thomas, Emma Patterson, the usual chorus of moral guardians. She tried for lightness, but his expression darkened. What did they say? Nothing worth repeating. Abby, just her name, but weighted with concern. She sighed. The Reverend warned me about my wayward behavior, suggested the town might turn their backs on me entirely if I continue my association with you. Colt went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded avalanches. I see. No, I don't think you do. She stepped closer, close enough to catch his familiar scent of pine and leather. I told him that their conditional decency wasn't worth having. Abby, I told him, she continued, gathering courage, that you'd shown me more kindness than most of his congregation combined. And I meant it. He studied her face, something fierce and tender warring in his expression. You shouldn't have to choose between me and your community. I'm not choosing between anything, she said firmly. I'm choosing for something, for someone. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what's expected. And what do you want? His voice had gone rough. You, she said simply. I want you. He moved then, pulling her against him in broad daylight where anyone could see. His arms came around her like shelter, like home, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing him in. I want you too, he murmured into her hair. God help me. Abby, I've wanted you since the day you opened your door in that first storm. They stood there in the snow, holding each other while the respectable folk of Elk Hollow perhaps watched and whispered, but wrapped in Colt's arms. Abby found she truly didn't care. Come on, he said finally, pulling back but keeping one arm around her. Let's get inside before we really give them something to talk about. They unloaded his wagon together, working in companionable rhythm, but once inside, with tea brewing and the fire crackling, a new tension filled the space. They'd crossed a line in her yard, acknowledged feelings that couldn't be taken back. I have something to tell you, Colt said, his hands wrapped around his mug, about why this was my last lumber run. Abby's heart stuttered. Oh, I've been saving. Every job, every contract, putting money aside. He met her eyes. Enough to buy the Hendricks place. She knew it a small ranch at the base of the mountain. Good land that had stood empty since old man Hendricks died last spring. That's wonderful. Colt. It needs work. House hasn't been lived in for a year. Fences need mending. Barn's got a hole in the roof. He paused. But it's close enough to town for visiting. Far enough out to keep some peace. Visiting, she repeated, something fluttering in her chest. Or more than visiting. He set down his mug, leaning forward. I'm done running. Abby, done hiding in the mountains like some wounded animal. I want to build something. A real home. A life. That sounds good. Her voice came out breathless. Does it? He stood, crossing to kneel beside her chair. Taking her hands in his, he looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams. Because I can't imagine building any of it without you. Colt. I know it's fast. No, we haven't courted proper, haven't done any of this the right way. But I also know I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. His hands tightened on hers. You see me, Abby, not the hermit or the dangerous loner, but me. And somehow, impossibly, you don't turn away. Because what I see, she said softly, touching his face, is a good man, a kind man, someone who makes me feel safe and seen and wanted. You are wanted, he said fiercely. More than you know. Then show me, she whispered, echoing her words from nights ago. This time when he kissed her, there was promise in it. Not just desire, though that was there too, making her blood sing, but commitment, future, forever. When they parted, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When the house is ready, when I can offer you a proper home. Marry me, Abby, and let them all gossip about how the hermit and the spinster found happiness despite their dire predictions. Because of them, maybe, Abby said, tears running down her cheeks. If they hadn't been so awful, we might never have found each other. Is that a yes? Yes, she laughed through her tears. Yes, Colt Merrick. I'll marry you. I'll help you fix that house and mend those fences and build a life that's ours. He kissed her again, sealing the promise, and somewhere in that kiss, Abby felt the last of her walls crumble. She'd spent so long being strong alone. She'd forgotten how much stronger two could be together. I love you, she said when they parted, the words new and terrifying and absolutely true. I love you too, he replied, wonder in his voice. Never thought I'd say those words again, but here we are. Here we are, she agreed, and kissed him once more just because she could. Outside, snow began to fall again, but gentle this time, no storm. Just winter's quiet blessing on two souls who'd found their match in the wilderness of each other's hearts. The days following Colt's proposal passed in a blur of quiet joy and careful planning. They agreed to keep their engagement private for now, not from shame, but to savor something that belonged only to them before the town's judgment inevitably intruded. Colt threw himself into preparing the Hendricks place, working from dawn to dusk to make it habitable. Abby continued her candle making, but now each day held new purpose. She was working toward a shared future, not just survival. A week passed before Colt appeared at her door again, exhaustion lining his face, but satisfaction glowing in his eyes. Come see, he said simply, extending his hand. They rode to the ranch in companionable silence, Abby's heart racing with anticipation. When they crested the final hill, she gasped. The house, while still modest, had been transformed. The roof was patched, windows cleaned and repaired, and a new porch railing stood straight and true. It's not finished, Colt said quickly, helping her down from the wagon. Still need to fix the barn, mend the fences, but... It's perfect, Abby interrupted, tears pricking her eyes. It's home. He showed her through the house, the kitchen he'd scrubbed clean, the bedroom with new floorboards, the small parlor where afternoon light streamed through clean windows. In what would be their bedroom, he'd placed a small gift on the windowsill, a candle holder, hand-carved from pine. Made it myself, he said, suddenly shy. Figured you'd want to keep working your craft. Might as well have proper holders. Abby traced the delicate carving mountain flowers and pine boughs intertwined. It's beautiful. Workshops out back, he continued. Old Hendrix used it for leatherwork, but with some changes, it'd make a fine place for candle making, bigger than what you have now. The thoughtfulness of it planning space for her work. Her independence made her throat tight. Colt Merrick, you continue to surprise me. Hope to keep doing that for a long time, he said softly. They were standing close in the empty bedroom, future hanging between them like morning mist. Abby reached up, drawing his face down to hers, and kissed him with all the love she couldn't yet put into words. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Colt rested his forehead against hers. Soon, he promised. Few more weeks to get everything ready. Then we'll tell the whole town. Make it official. I can wait, Abby said, though every day apart felt like a small eternity. They spent the afternoon working side by side, Abby cleaning windows while Colt repaired cabinet doors. It felt natural, right, like a preview of the life they'd build together. As the sun began to sink, painting the mountains gold, Colt drove her home with promises to return in 3 days. But promises, Abby was learning, were fragile things in the face of nature's whims. That night, Colt didn't return to his mountain cabin. He stayed at the ranch, wanting to finish the barn roof at first light. It saved his life. Abby woke to pounding on her door and James Mitchell's frantic voice. Miss Dawes, there's been an accident. That timber boss sent me, says you need to come quick. Her blood turned to ice. Colt! He's alive, James said quickly, seeing her face. But hurt bad. They've got him at Doc Morrison's place. He's been asking for you. She didn't remember the ride to town, didn't remember how she got from wagon to doctor's office. All she knew was the terror clawing at her chest, the prayer repeating in her mind. Let him be all right. Please, let him be all right. Doc Morrison, Samuel's father, but a good man despite his son, met her at the door. He's stable, he said immediately. But it's serious. Miss Dawes, you should prepare yourself. The sight of Colt lying still and pale in the narrow bed nearly drove her to her knees. His left arm was splinted and bandaged, a gash across his forehead stitched closed. But his eyes were open, finding hers immediately. Abby, he breathed. She flew to his side, taking his good hand in both of hers. What happened? Ambush, he said, voice rough with pain. Group of men, up at my cabin, looking for money they thought I had hidden. A bitter smile touched his lips. Guess they didn't know I'd spent it all on a ranch. Who? But even as she asked, she suspected. Didn't see faces, but one of them smelled like whiskey and expensive cologne. His fingers tightened on hers. Samuel Morrison wears cologne like that. Rage flared through her, hot and bright. I'll kill him. No. Colt's voice sharpened. No, Abby. Promise me. He's not worth it. But he failed. A fierce satisfaction flickered in Colt's eyes. Fought them off. Got to my horse. If I'd been at the cabin like usual instead of the ranch. He squeezed her hand. Sometimes plans work out different than expected. Doc Morrison returned then, checking Colt's bandages with professional efficiency. You're lucky. Mr. Merrick, arm's broken but clean, it'll heal straight. The head wound looked worse than it is. But you've lost blood, and there's risk of fever. You need rest and careful tending. I'll tend him, Abby said immediately. The doctor's eyebrows rose. Miss Dawes, that wouldn't be proper. She met his gaze steadily. Dr. Morrison, I'm going to marry this man. I'll tend him at my home or here, but I will tend him. Your choice. To his credit, the doctor merely nodded. Your home might be better, quieter. I'll help you get him there. The journey was agonizing. Every bump in the road drawing pained breaths from Colt despite his efforts to stay quiet. By the time they got him settled in Abby's bed, propriety be damned sweat beaded his forehead and his jaw was clenched tight. "Shouldn't be here," he murmured as she covered him with quilts. "Not right. You nursing me in your own bed. Would you rather I'd left you in town, let Samuel finish what he started?" That silenced him. She spent the rest of the day at his side, spooning broth between his lips, changing cool cloths on his forehead, holding his hand when pain made him restless. As night fell, she pulled her chair close to the bed. "Sleep," she urged. "I'll be right here." "Abby." His good hand found hers. "I'm sorry. This isn't how it was supposed to happen." "Life rarely goes according to plan," she said softly. "But you're here. You're alive. That's all that matters." "Love you," he murmured, already drifting towards sleep. "Love you too," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. She dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every time he stirred. Sometime near midnight, his breathing changed, becoming labored. When she touched his forehead, it burned with fever. The next hours were the longest of her life. She bathed him with cool water, forced willow bark tea between his lips, prayed with desperate fervor to any power that might listen. He tossed and muttered, caught in fever dreams, sometimes calling her name with such longing it broke her heart. Dawn was breaking when the fever finally broke. Colt's eyes opened, clear and focused, finding her immediately. "You look terrible," he rasped. A laugh that was half sob escaped her. "You're one to talk." "Come here." He tugged weakly at her hand. "You need rest." "I'm fine in the chair." "Abby," just her name, but weighted with need. "Please." She shouldn't. It went against every propriety, every rule. But faced with his pleading eyes and her own exhaustion, Abby found she didn't care. She lay down carefully beside him, mindful of his injuries. Colt sighed contentedly, turning his face into her hair. "Better," he murmured. "So much better." They slept then, curled together like quotation marks around a shared story. When next Abby woke, afternoon light slanted through the window, and Colt was watching her with such tenderness it stole her breath. "Hello?" she whispered. "Hello?" He lifted his good hand to touch her cheek. "Thank you, for staying, for fighting for me." "Always," she promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. They lay there in the quiet afternoon, no longer patient and nurse, but simply two people in love, grateful for another day, another chance, another moment together. "Marry me now," Colt said suddenly. "Today, tomorrow, as soon as I can stand." "Your ranch isn't ready." "Don't care about the ranch. Don't care about proper courting or what the town thinks or any of it." His voice grew fierce. "I almost lost this. Almost lost you. I don't want to waste another day." Abby's heart raced. "The Reverend won't marry us, not after our conversation." "Then we'll find someone who will. Judge Carter in Cedar Ridge. Maybe, or we'll go to Denver if we have to." He struggled to sit up, determination overriding pain. "I'm done waiting. Abby, done pretending this is anything less than everything." She helped him settle back against the pillows, her mind spinning. It was madness, impulsive, improper. It was perfect. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, let's get married as soon as you can travel. Let's stop waiting for approval that will never come and start living the life we want." The smile that bloomed across his face was worth any scandal. "Mrs. Abigail Merrick," he said, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she admitted, kissing him gently. "So do I." As she settled back beside him, careful of his splinted arm, Abby marveled at how much had changed since that first storm brought him to her door. She'd thought herself destined for solitude, had made peace with being the spinster candlemaker on the hill. Instead, she'd found love with the last person the town would have chosen for her, and the only person she would choose for herself. Let them talk. Let them whisper and judge and shake their heads. She had Colt. He had her. Everything else was just noise. 2 weeks had passed since the attack, and Colt was finally strong enough to move about, though his arm remained in a sling. They decided to wait until he could travel comfortably before making the journey to Cedar Ridge for their wedding. But on this cold February morning, their plans took an unexpected turn. Gone. Abby stared at the timber foreman who'd appeared at her door. "What do you mean, gone?" "Just what I said. Miss." Jake Holcomb shifted uncomfortably. His weathered face creased with concern. "Colt Merrick headed north yesterday morning. Said he had business to tend to. Dangerous business, by the look in his eyes." Abby's blood ran cold. "He couldn't have. He's injured. He can barely ride." "Saw him myself, ma'am, moving slow but determined. Had that look men get when they're settling scores." After Jake left, Abby paced her small cabin like a caged animal. Colt had been quiet the past few days, withdrawn in a way that should have warned her. She'd thought it was pain from his injuries, frustration at his temporary helplessness. Now she understood he'd been planning. "Fool man," she muttered, yanking on her heaviest coat. "Stubborn, reckless fool." She knew where he'd gone. The lumber camps to the north where rough men gathered, where disputes were settled with fists and worse, where Samuel Morrison had been spending time lately, hiding from his father's disapproval and the town's judgment. Without letting herself think about the dangers, Abby saddled her old mare and set out. The trail north was treacherous in winter, especially for someone who rarely ventured beyond town, but love and fear made her bold. The first lumber camp she reached hadn't seen Colt. Neither had the second, but at the third, a grizzled cook pointed further up the mountain. Big man with his arm tied up. "Yeah, he passed through this morning, looking for Morrison's crew. They're cutting timber up at Devil's Canyon." Devil's Canyon. Even the name sent shivers through her. A deep gorge with steep sides, where one false step meant death on the rocks below. No place for a wounded man seeking vengeance. The sun was sinking by the time she reached the canyon. She heard the voices before she saw them, angry shouts echoing off stone walls. Heart pounding, she dismounted and crept forward through the trees. The scene that met her eyes stopped her breath. Colt stood at the edge of the canyon, his good arm holding Samuel Morrison by the shirt front. 3 other men Samuel's hired thugs from the attack, she guessed, lay groaning on the ground, even wounded. Colt had dealt with them. "It was just business," Samuel was babbling, his face pale with terror. "Nothing personal. They said you had gold hidden." "You came to my home." Colt's voice was deadly quiet. "You tried to take what I'd earned honest. Could have killed me." "But I didn't. You're alive." "No thanks to you." Colt's grip tightened, and Samuel's feet scrabbled at the canyon's edge. "Give me one reason I shouldn't return the favor." "Colt." Both men turned at Abby's voice. The relief that flashed across Colt's face was quickly replaced by frustration. "Abby, get back. This isn't what isn't my business." She stepped into the clearing, chin high despite her racing heart. "The man I'm going to marry is about to throw his life away for revenge, and it's not my business." "He tried to kill me." "And if you kill him, they'll hang you." She moved closer, keeping her voice steady. "Is that what you want, to make me a widow before I'm even a wife?" Something in Colt's face cracked. The killing rage that had sustained him this far began to fade, replaced by exhaustion and pain. His grip on Samuel loosened slightly. "Please," she said softly. "This isn't who you are. You're better than him. Better than this." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through the canyon and Samuel's whimpering. Then Colt released him with a disgusted shove. Samuel collapsed to his knees, gasping. "Get out," Colt said quietly. "Leave Elk Hollow. Tonight. If I see you again, if you come near Abby or me, I won't be so merciful." Samuel scrambled to his feet and ran. not even pausing to help his injured companions. Colt stood staring at the canyon's depths, swaying slightly. "Colt," Abby touched his good arm gently. He turned to her, and she saw tears tracking down his face. "Could have lost you," he said roughly. "Because of him, because some people can't stand seeing others happy." "But you didn't lose me." She stepped into his embrace, careful of his injuries. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He held her with desperate strength, burying his face in her hair. "How did you find me?" "Jake told me you'd left. I knew where you'd go." She pulled back to look at him sternly. "Did you really think I'd let you face this alone?" "I wanted to protect you." "We protect each other," she corrected. "That's what partners do." The ride back was slow and painful. Colt's burst of vengeful energy had cost him. He slumped in the saddle, face gray with exhaustion. They stopped at the first lumber camp where the cook, bless him, offered them the use of a cabin for the night. "Can't make it back to town in the dark," the old man said knowingly. "Not with him half dead on his feet. You take the foreman's cabin, he's in town till Tuesday." Abby helped Colt inside, settling him on the narrow bed. His fever had returned, though not as fierce as before. She bathed his face with cool water from the pitcher, checking his bandages for fresh bleeding. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You were right. Would have been a fool to kill him." "Yes, you would have." She smoothed his hair back gently. "But I understand why you wanted to." "Do you?" His eyes searched hers. "Do you understand what it did to me, lying there helpless, knowing he might come for you next?" "The same thing it did to me when Jake said you'd gone after him." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "We can't protect each other from everything, Colt, but we can refuse to let fear or anger destroy what we're building." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How did I get so lucky finding you?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," she said firmly. "We found each other because we were both brave enough to open our doors in a storm." That drew a weak smile from him. "Speaking of storms, sounds like another one's coming in." She listened and heard it wind picking up, the particular quality of silence that preceded heavy snow. "Good," she said. "Gives you time to rest before we travel back." "Abby," there was warning in his voice. "People will talk if we—" "Let them talk." She lay down beside him, fully clothed but needing the closeness. "I'm tired of living by their rules, tired of pretending I care about their gossip when all I care about is you." He turned into her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Soon as I can sit a horse proper, we're going to Cedar Ridge, making this official. I'll hold you to that. Colt Merrick." They lay together as snow began to fall outside, turning the rough lumber camp into something magical. Abby thought about the journey that had brought them here, two solitary souls who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. "I used to think being alone was strength," she said quietly. "That needing someone meant weakness." "What changed?" "You did." She looked up at him. "You showed me that real strength is being brave enough to be vulnerable, to let someone see all of you, broken parts included." "You saw me at my worst today," he said roughly. "The violence I'm capable of. Doesn't that frighten you?" "No." She touched his face gently. "Because I also saw you stop. Saw you choose love over vengeance. Even when everything in you wanted blood, that's not weakness. Colt, that's the greatest strength there is." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I love you, Abby Dawes, more than I thought possible to love anyone." "Show me," she whispered, echoing words that had become their refrain. This time, he showed her with gentleness rather than passion, soft kisses and whispered promises, careful touches that spoke of reverence rather than desire. They had the rest of their lives for passion. Tonight was about something deeper, the choice to trust, to forgive, to build rather than destroy. When morning came, bringing clear skies and fresh snow, they rose to find the camp cook had left breakfast outside their door with a note For the lady who brought Colt Merrick back from the edge, the whole mountain owes you thanks. As they prepared for the journey home, Abby caught sight of their reflection in the cabin's small mirror. They looked like what they were, two people who'd been through trials and come out stronger. His arm might be broken. Her reputation might be ruined. But they were together. That was all that mattered. "Ready?" Colt asked, helping her with her coat. "For anything," she replied, meaning it. The ride back to Elk Hollow took most of the day, but neither minded. They talked of plans for the ranch, of the life they'd build together, of children who might someday run through the meadows they passed. As they crested the final hill above town, Colt reined in his horse. "Look," he said softly. Below them, Elk Hollow spread out like a Christmas village, smoke rising from chimneys, people going about their daily lives. From here, it looked peaceful, even welcoming. "Our town," Abby said, surprising herself with the possessive, "Our home," Colt agreed. "Whatever they think of us." As they descended toward the cluster of buildings, Abby straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Let them look, let them whisper. She rode beside the man she loved, and that was worth more than all the approval in the world. Tomorrow or the next day, they'd make the journey to Cedar Ridge. They'd speak their vows before a judge who didn't care about their past, only their future. They'd return as husband and wife, ready to face whatever came next. But today, they were simply Colt and Abby, two people who'd found each other in a storm and refused to let go. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The fever returned with vengeance 3 days after their return from Devil's Canyon. Abby woke in the pre-dawn darkness to find Colt burning hot beside her. His breathing labored and harsh. The ride through the cold, the confrontation with Samuel, the stress on his still-healing body. It had all taken its toll. "No," she whispered, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Not now. Not when we're so close." But fever didn't care about wedding plans or happiness nearly within reach. By noon, Colt was delirious, calling out names she didn't recognize, reliving moments from a past he rarely discussed. She caught fragments, something about Ohio, a woman named Catherine, a fire that took everything. Doc Morrison came when summoned, his face grave as he examined his patient. "The wound's infected," he said quietly. "Must have torn something open during his excursion. This is serious, Miss Dawes." "Tell me what to do." "Keep the fever down. Get fluids in him if you can. Clean the wound every few hours with this." He handed her a bottle of carbolic solution. "And pray. Sometimes that's all we can do." The next days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Abby barely left Colt's side, bathing him with cool water, forcing broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, changing bandages with hands that shook despite her determination to stay strong. On the third night, the worst night, he stopped recognizing her. "Catherine," he mumbled, reaching out blindly. "Catherine, I'm sorry. Should have been there. Should have saved you." Abby's heart cracked, but she took his hand anyway. "Shh, it's all right. You're safe." "The fire couldn't get to them in time. My fault, all my fault." She held him while he wept for losses she was only beginning to understand, murmuring comfort for wounds that went deeper than any physical injury. When dawn finally came, his fever broke, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. "Abby," his voice was barely a whisper, "you're here." "Where else would I be?" She smoothed his damp hair back, relief making her dizzy. "Thought I dreamed you." He caught her hand, holding it like an anchor. "Was afraid I'd wake up and be alone again." "Never," she promised fiercely. "You're stuck with me, Colt Merrick, in sickness and health. Remember." "We're not married yet," he reminded her with a ghost of his usual humor. "Details," she said, drawing a weak smile from him, as he grew stronger over the following days. Colt finally spoke of what the fever had revealed. They sat together in the afternoon sun streaming through her window, his head in her lap as she carded her fingers through his hair. "Catherine was my wife," he said quietly. "Back in Ohio. We married young. I was 20. She was 18. Had a little girl, Sarah. She was 3 when—" Abby waited, continuing her gentle ministrations. "House fire. Started in the barn, spread faster than anyone could have predicted. I was in town, getting supplies." His voice went flat, emotionless. "By the time I got back, nothing left but ashes. Lost them both." "Oh, Colt." Tears ran down her face for his old pain, for the family she'd never know. "Town blamed me, said if I'd been home where a husband should be, might have saved them. They weren't wrong." He looked up at her, eyes full of old guilt. "That's why I came west. Couldn't stay where every street corner held memories. Couldn't face the blame in everyone's eyes." "It wasn't your fault," Abby said firmly. "Wasn't it I chose to go to town that day? Chose to leave them alone. And I chose to stay unmarried all these years. Does that mean I deserve loneliness?" She cupped his face gently. "Sometimes terrible things happen, Colt, not because we deserve them or caused them, but because that's the nature of living. The only choice we have is whether to let tragedy define us or to find the courage to love again." He turned his face into her palm. "Thought I'd never want to risk it again, losing someone. Then I met you, and somehow not having you seemed worse than any risk. I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Not in fire or fever or any other disaster you can imagine." "I know." He sat up slowly, still weak but determined. "Which is why we're going to Cedar Ridge tomorrow." "Tomorrow, Colt. You can barely stand." "I can sit a wagon seat. That's all I need." His jaw set in that stubborn line she'd come to know well. "I've lost one family. Abby, I won't lose another. Won't give this town or fate or anyone else another chance to take you from me." Looking at the determination in his eyes, she knew arguing was pointless. "All right, tomorrow." They set out at dawn, Abby driving the wagon while Colt rested against her shoulder. The journey to Cedar Ridge usually took half a day. In their condition, it took nearly all of it. But finally, as the sun touched the mountain peaks, they rolled into the larger town. Judge Carter was a round, jovial man who didn't bat an eye at their request for immediate marriage. "Been expecting you to," he said with a wink. "Sam Morrison came through here last week, full of whiskey and dire warnings about the violent hermit and the witch woman. Figured any couple that could inspire such dramatics must be worth marrying." The ceremony was simple, just them, the judge and his wife as witness. But when Colt slipped a plain gold band on Abby's finger procured from heaven knows where, she felt more blessed than any bride in the fanciest church wedding. "I, Colt Merrick, take you, Abigail Dawes, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, voice rough with emotion. "To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in storms and in sunshine, for as long as we both shall live. I, Abigail Dawes, take you, Colt Merrick, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she replied through tears. "To love and to cherish, in solitude and in company, in hardship and in joy, for all the days of my life. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Judge Carter proclaimed, beaming. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Merrick, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, mindful of Colt's still healing body, but it held promises of passion to come. When they parted, both were crying and smiling in equal measure. They spent their wedding night at Cedar Ridge's small hotel, too exhausted for anything but holding each other and marveling at the gold bands on their fingers. Abby lay with her head on Colt's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For seeing past the hermit, for being patient with my demons, for choosing me even though I come with more baggage than any woman should have to carry." She propped herself up to look at him. "Colt Merrick, you listen to me. You're not baggage. You're not a burden. You're the man who makes me feel safe and seen and cherished. You're my husband, my partner, my love, and I would choose you again every day for the rest of my life." He pulled her down for another kiss, this one deeper, hungrier. When they parted, his eyes held heat that had nothing to do with fever. "Soon as I'm healed proper," he promised. "I'll hold you to that," she said, echoing their old refrain. The journey back to Elk Hollow the next day felt different. They were no longer two separate people fighting the world alone. They were a unit, a family, ready to face whatever came. As they crested the hill above town, Colt took the reins despite Abby's protests. "I want to drive us home," he said simply. "Want everyone to see us coming in together." And they did see. Work stopped. Conversations halted. As Mr. and Mrs. Colt Merrick rolled down Main Street bold as brass. Some faces showed shock, others disapproval. But a surprising number showed quiet approval or even joy. "Mrs. Sullivan called out, "Congratulations," from her porch. The blacksmith tipped his hat. Even Doc Morrison offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. They drove straight to the ranch, their ranch now. Colt had given her the deed as a wedding gift, insisting both their names be on it. "Partners," he'd said, "in everything." As he helped her down from the wagon, Abby noticed something different about the house. Smoke rose from the chimney, and were those curtains in the windows. "Colt," he smiled, the first full, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. "Wedding present. Asked Jake and some of the lumber boys to finish setting it up while we were gone. It's not fancy, but it's ready." "It's perfect," she breathed, and meant it. He swept her up in his good arm, carrying her over the threshold despite her protests about his injuries. Inside, she found a home, simple furniture, a bed with a new quilt, her candle-making supplies already arranged in the workshop out back. "Welcome home, Mrs. Merrick," Colt said softly, setting her down but keeping her close. "Welcome home, Mr. Merrick," she replied, pulling him down for a kiss. As the sun set over their first day as husband and wife, Abby stood at the window watching the mountains turn purple with dusk. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked. "Not one," she said firmly. "You. Only that it took so long to find you." They stood together watching night fall over their land, their home, their future. Tomorrow would bring challenges Colt's arm still needed to heal. The ranch needed work. The town would always have its gossips. But tonight, they were simply Colt and Abby Merrick, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely place and held on despite every obstacle. "I love you," she said, leaning back into his warmth. "Love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always will." And standing there in their simple home, with the mountains standing guard and the stars beginning to shine, Abby knew he meant it. They'd found something worth fighting for, worth keeping, worth cherishing. They'd found forever. The first weeks of married life passed in a blur of quiet contentment. Colt's arm slowly healed, and together they worked to make the ranch truly theirs. Abby set up her candle-making workshop in the outbuilding, while Colt repaired fences and tended to the small herd of cattle that came with the property. It should have been perfect, and it was, except for the way Colt sometimes went quiet, staring at the mountains with shadows in his eyes. "What troubles you?" Abby asked one evening as they sat by their own hearth, her head on his shoulder. "Nothing," he said automatically, then sighed. "Everything. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this happiness to be snatched away like before." "That's not going to happen," she said firmly. "You can't know that." "No," she agreed, "but I can choose to live in joy instead of fear. We both can." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I'm trying. Abby, God knows I'm trying." Their tentative peace was shattered the next morning when riders appeared on their land. 3 men, badges glinting in the morning sun. the territorial marshal and 2 deputies. Abby's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the deputies, Samuel Morrison's cousin from Denver. "Colt Merrick," the marshal called out. Colt emerged from the barn, his movements careful and controlled. "That's me. You're under arrest for the assault of Samuel Morrison and 3 other men at Devil's Canyon. You'll need to come with us." "No." Abby stepped forward, putting herself between Colt and the lawmen. "Samuel Morrison attacked my husband first, ambushed him at his cabin, left him for dead." "That's not the story we heard, ma'am," the marshal said, not unkindly. "Mr. Morrison filed a complaint in Denver. Says your husband tracked him down, threatened his life. 3 witnesses confirm it." "His hired thugs," Colt said quietly. "The same ones who jumped me." "That's for a judge to sort out." The marshal's hand rested on his pistol. "You coming peaceful, Merrick?" Abby felt Colt tense behind her, weighing his options. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then his hand settled on her shoulder. Gentle but firm. "I'll come," he said, "but I need a word with my wife first." The marshal nodded, and Colt drew Abby aside. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "Go to town, find Jake Holcomb and the lumber crew. They saw my injuries after the attack, can testify to what really happened. Wire Judge Carter in Cedar Ridge, he might have influence." "Colt, no, don't go with them. We can't." He cupped her face in his hands. "Running would only make it worse. I won't have you living as an outlaw's wife, always looking over your shoulder." "But what if—" "Have faith," he said softly. "In truth, in justice, in us." He kissed her, fierce and desperate. "I love you, Abby Merrick. Whatever happens, remember that." Then he was gone, riding away with the lawmen while she stood frozen in their dooryard. The morning that had dawned so bright now felt dark as winter midnight. But Abby Merrick hadn't survived this long by giving in to despair. Within an hour, she was in town, rallying support. Jake Holcomb was first to volunteer his testimony. "Saw Colt right after those cowards jumped him. Man was half dead, arm broken, head split open. If he went after Morrison, it was justice, not assault." Doc Morrison, despite his son's involvement, agreed to provide medical records. "I treated Mr. Merrick's injuries. They were consistent with an ambush, not a fair fight." Even Mrs. Sullivan offered to testify that Samuel Morrison's been trouble since he was a boy, drunk and mean, just like his father before rehabilitation. Within 2 days, Abby had gathered a dozen witnesses willing to speak for Colt's character and against Samuel's. She hired the best lawyer in Cedar Ridge, mortgaging the ranch to pay his fee despite knowing Colt would be furious. "Your husband's case is strong," the lawyer, Mr. Jameson, told her after reviewing everything. "But Samuel Morrison has connections in Denver. His uncle is a territorial senator. This won't be easy." "Nothing about our life has been easy," Abby replied. "That doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for." The trial was set for 2 weeks hence in Denver. 2 weeks of Colt locked in a cell. 2 weeks of Abby alone on their ranch. 2 weeks of uncertainty eating at her like acid. She threw herself into work, making candles until her hands were raw, tending the cattle with skills Colt had barely begun to teach her. At night, she lay in their 2 empty bed, clutching his pillow and praying to any power that might listen. A week before the trial, unexpected help arrived. A woman Abby had never seen before appeared at her door elegant despite her traveling clothes, with eyes the same storm gray as Colt's. "You must be Abigail," the woman said. "I'm Margaret Sinclair, Colt's sister." Abby's mouth fell open. "He never mentioned—" "He wouldn't. We haven't spoken in 10 years. Margaret's composed face showed cracks of old pain. "Not since Catherine and Sarah died. I blamed him. You see, said terrible things, but when I heard about his trouble—" "Come in," Abby said, stepping aside. Please. Over tea, Margaret told her story. She'd married well, moved to Chicago, tried to forget the brother she'd driven away with her grief and rage. But blood was blood, and news of Colt's arrest had reached her through old Ohio connections. "I've brought letters," Margaret said, producing a packet. "Character witnesses from Ohio, people who knew Colt before, who can speak to his nature, and I've engaged a second lawyer, one with influence in territorial politics." "Why?" Abby asked. "After 10 years of silence, why help him now?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've had 10 years to regret my cruelty. 10 years to realize that we both lost everything that day, and turning on each other only compounded the tragedy." She reached across the table, grasping Abby's hand. "And because my brother apparently found love again, despite everything. That deserves protecting." The day of the trial dawned cold and clear. Abby dressed in her best dress, the one she'd married Colt in, and tried to still her shaking hands. Margaret sat beside her in the packed courtroom, a pillar of elegant support. When they brought Colt in, shackled like a common criminal, it took all Abby's strength not to cry out. He was thinner, shadows under his eyes, but his back was straight and his gaze found hers immediately. The love in his look gave her courage. The prosecution presented their case first. Samuel Morrison, cleaned up and playing the victim, told a tale of unprovoked attack. His 3 companions corroborated every word, painting Colt as a violent mountain man who'd tracked them down for imagined slights. Then came the defense. Jake Holcomb and the lumber crew testified about finding Colt after the ambush. Doc Morrison, brave in his honesty, detailed injuries that couldn't have come from being the aggressor. Character witness after character witness spoke of Colt's integrity, his gentleness with those weaker than himself, his grief over past losses. Margaret took the stand last, her testimony bringing tears to many eyes as she spoke of the brother she'd known, loving husband and father, destroyed by tragedy, but never cruel. "I failed him once," she said, looking directly at Colt. "I won't fail him again." Through it all, Samuel's story began to crumble. Inconsistencies emerged. One of his companions, under sharp questioning, admitted they'd been drinking heavily that day, that Samuel had talked about teaching the hermit a lesson. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, 3 hours that felt like 3 years to Abby. When they finally returned, she gripped Margaret's hand so tight her knuckles went white. "We find the defendant, Colt Merrick, not guilty of assault. Further, we recommend investigation into the initial attack on Mr. Merrick's person." The courtroom erupted. Abby didn't remember moving, only that suddenly she was in Colt's arms, both of them crying and laughing at once. Margaret stood nearby, tears streaming down her composed face. "You came," Colt said to his sister over Abby's head. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered. "For everything, for taking so long." "You're here now," he said simply. "That's what matters." As they left the courthouse, Samuel Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think you've won, but—" "It is over," Abby interrupted, stepping forward. "You've lost, Samuel, lost your credibility, your reputation, your power to hurt us. Go back to wherever you've been hiding and stay there. We have a life to live." For a moment, she thought he might strike her. Then Marshal Thompson appeared at her elbow. "Problem here, Mrs. Merrick." "No, Marshal," she said steadily. "Mr. Morrison was just leaving. Weren't you, Samuel?" Faced with the marshal's stern gaze and the crowd's hostile murmurs, Samuel slunk away. They never saw him again. The ride home was subdued despite their victory. Colt sat between Abby and Margaret, still processing his sister's presence, his freedom, the way his wife had fought for him. "You mortgaged the ranch," he said quietly to Abby. "I'd have sold it outright if necessary," she replied. "Bricks and wood are just things. Colt, you're irreplaceable." "My brave girl," he murmured, kissing her temple. Margaret stayed for a week. She and Colt slowly rebuilding their relationship through shared memories and careful conversations. When she finally left, promising to visit again soon, something in Colt seemed healed, a wound older than his physical injuries finally beginning to close. That night, as they lay in their bed for the first time in 3 weeks, Colt held Abby like she might disappear. "I thought I'd lost you," he admitted. "Sitting in that cell, all I could think was that fate was taking you away like it took them." "But it didn't," she reminded him. "We're here. We're together. We won." "You won," he corrected. "You fought when I couldn't. You refused to let them take me." His voice went rough with emotion. "I've never had anyone fight for me like that." "Get used to it," she said firmly. "I'll fight for you every day if I have to. That's what wives do." "Partners," he agreed, finding her lips in the darkness. "In everything." As passion finally overtook them, Abby thought about the strange turns life could take. She'd started as a spinster candle maker, alone on a hill. Now she was a wife, a fighter, a woman who'd faced down the territorial court system and won. All because she'd opened her door in a storm and let love walk in. Outside, the wind sang through the mountains, but inside their home, all was warmth and safety and the promise of tomorrow. They'd weathered the worst storm yet. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Spring came early that year, melting the snow from the mountains and bringing the promise of new beginnings. Abby stood at the entrance to the town hall, her best dress pressed and her head held high despite the whispers that still followed her like shadows. "You sure about this?" Colt asked, standing beside her in his one good suit. "Never been more sure of anything," she replied, squeezing his hand. Today was the Spring Festival, Elk Hollow's biggest social event of the year. For the past 3 years since their marriage, they'd avoided it, content to let the town celebrate without them. But something had shifted over the winter. The trial had shown them they had more allies than enemies. Margaret's visit had reminded them that isolation could become its own prison. "We belong to this community whether they like it or not," Abby had said when proposing they attend. "Our children will grow up here. It's time to stop hiding." The mention of children had made Colt go still, then pull her close with fierce tenderness. They'd been trying for 2 years now, each month bringing fresh disappointment, but hope, like spring flowers, kept blooming despite the frost. Now, as they entered the decorated hall, conversation stuttered to a halt. Every eye turned to them, the hermit and the spinster who defied convention and somehow thrived. Then, from across the room, a clear voice called out, "Abby Colt, over here!" It was Sarah Brennan, the schoolteacher who'd quietly supported them through the trial. She waved them over to her table, where several other couples sat. Jake Holcomb and his wife, the blacksmith and his family, Doc Morrison. There alone, but smiling warmly. "Sit," Sarah commanded. "The dancing's about to start." And just like that, the spell broke. Conversations resumed. The fiddle player struck up a tune, and life went on. Some still stared, some whispered, but others nodded greeting or even smiled. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Merrick?" Colt asked formally, standing and offering his hand. "I thought you didn't dance," Abby said, surprised. "I didn't do a lot of things before you." His eyes held that warmth she'd come to cherish. "But I'm learning." They took the floor together, Colt moving carefully but with surprising grace. Other couples joined them, and soon the hall was full of swirling skirts and laughter. When old Mrs. Sullivan cut in to dance with Colt, insisting Abby dance with her grandson. The normalcy of it all nearly made Abby cry. They were becoming part of the community, not fully accepted, perhaps never that, but acknowledged, included. It was more than she dared hope for. Halfway through the evening, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A young couple entered, travel-worn and clearly uncertain. The woman was heavily pregnant. the man protective and wary. "Looking for the mayor," the man said. "We're passing through, but my wife, the baby's coming early. We need help." Before anyone else could move, Abby was there. "I'm Abby Merrick. My husband and I have a ranch just outside town. You'll stay with us." "We couldn't impose," the woman began, then gasped, clutching her belly. "It's not an imposition," Colt said, appearing at Abby's side. "It's what neighbors do. Doc Morrison will need you to follow." They got the couple Thomas and Mary Fletcher settled at the ranch just as Mary's labor began in earnest. Abby had assisted at births before, but never as the primary support. She found herself drawing on memories of her aunt's calm competence, talking Mary through each contraction while Doc Morrison prepared. "You're doing wonderfully," Abby soothed, wiping Mary's forehead. "Just breathe. Your baby's almost here." Colt paced outside like an expectant father himself, bringing fresh water and clean linens whenever called. As the night wore on and Mary's cries grew stronger, Abby caught him standing at the window, tension in every line of his body. "She'll be fine," Abby assured him during a brief break. "They both will." "I know." But his voice was rough, and she knew he was remembering another night, another birth that had led to such loss. When the baby finally came, a healthy girl with lusty lungs, Colt was the first to smile, the first to congratulate the exhausted parents, watching him gently support the new father. Abby felt her heart overflow with love for this man who'd faced his worst fears to help strangers. The Fletchers stayed 3 days, recovering and preparing to continue their journey. On their last night, as they all sat around the dinner table, Mary said something that changed everything. "We can't thank you enough. When everyone in town hesitated, you opened your home without question." She looked between Abby and Colt. "You'll make wonderful parents someday." "Mary," Thomas warned, obviously aware of some social breach. "What? It's true." Mary turned back to them. "I'm sorry. Have I said something wrong?" "No," Abby said softly. "Just something hopeful." Later, after the Fletchers had retired, Abby found Colt on the porch, staring at the stars. "You were wonderful with them," she said, settling beside him. "Patient, kind, generous, everything a father should be." "Abby, I know we haven't talked about it much, the disappointment each month, but seeing you these past days, the way you cared for them." She took a breath. "If we can't have children of our own, would you consider taking in orphans? There are so many who need homes." Colt turned to her, starlight catching the tears on his cheeks. "You do that, take in other people's children, love them as our own. Love isn't limited by blood," Abby said simply. "You taught me that. We have this house, this land, all this love with nowhere to go. Why not share it?" He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, let's do that. Let's fill this house with laughter again." The next morning brought unexpected news. The Fletchers, overwhelmed by the kindness shown them, had spoken to everyone they met in town about the Merrick's generosity. The story spread like wildfire how the couple everyone gossiped about had opened their home to strangers in need. Reverend Thomas himself appeared at their door that afternoon, hat literally in hand. "I owe you both an apology," he said stiffly. "I judged hastily and spoke harshly. Your actions toward the Fletcher family show true Christian charity. I was wrong." Abby accepted his apology graciously, though Colt remained wary. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, something shifted in Elk Hollow. Abby's candle orders increased not from pity now, but from genuine respect. People nodded on the street, stopped to chat about weather and crops. When Colt mentioned at the general store that they were thinking of taking in orphans, 3 families immediately offered hand-me-down clothes and toys. "Seems the town's finally seeing what I saw from the start," Colt said one evening as they walked through their fields. planning where to build a larger garden for the children they hoped to welcome. "And what's that?" Abby asked, threading her arm through his. "That Abigail Dawes Merrick is the strongest, bravest, most generous woman in the territory, and that I'm the luckiest man alive to call her wife." Spring Festival came around again, marking 4 years since that snowy night when everything changed. This time, when they entered the town hall, people called out greetings. Sarah Brennan had saved them seats. The mayor's wife complimented Abby's dress. When the dancing started, Colt didn't hesitate. He swept Abby onto the floor with confidence born of practice and joy. As they swirled among their neighbors, some friends now, some still merely cordial, Abby marveled at how far they'd come. "People are staring," Colt murmured in her ear. "Let them," Abby replied, remembering her own words from years ago. "No, look." He spun her so she could see. "They're smiling. They're staring because we're happy." And they were. Happy in a way that had nothing to do with social acceptance and everything to do with the life they'd built together. A life of mutual respect, shared dreams, and love strong enough to weather any storm. As the music slowed, Colt pulled her closer. "Remember that first night when I said one kiss wouldn't hurt?" "I remember," Abby said softly. "I was wrong." He smiled down at her. "It changed everything. Best hurt I ever felt." She laughed, drawing amused glances from nearby couples. "Colt Merrick, are you becoming romantic in your old age?" "Maybe. You've been a terrible influence on me. Mrs. Merrick got me dancing at socials, talking to neighbors, planning for children. Next thing you know, I'll be running for mayor." "Don't get carried away," she teased. But as they danced on, surrounded by the community that had finally embraced them, Abby thought anything was possible. They'd started as two solitary souls, broken by loss and wary of connection. Now they were partners, lovers, friends, soon to be parents to children who needed them. The gossips had been wrong about so many things, but they'd been right about one: that hermit and that spinster were definitely up to something. They were building a life. They were choosing joy. They were proving that love could bloom even in the rockiest soil, growing stronger for the storms it weathered. As the evening wound down, Colt leaned close to whisper in her ear, "I love you, Abby Merrick, today, tomorrow, always." "Always," she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss. Not their first kiss that had been stolen in a storm. Not their last; those would number in the thousands over the years to come. But a kiss that said everything: we survived. We thrived. We chose each other. And we'd choose each other again every day for the rest of their lives. The hermit and the spinster had become Colt and Abby Merrick, proof that love could transform not just two people, but an entire town and their story. It was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Abby and Colt's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these heartfelt frontier stories.